talk about French seams. I think everybody knows how to do a French seam. I've seen a lot of different ways. This is just a guide for you to use. I hear some people say, just sew wrong sides together, then right sides together. But that's true, except you have to be careful with your garment fitting in the end. So you want to make sure that your seam allowance, you're not taking any more seam allowance than what your seam allowance is designated for. For instance, if you are doing a 1/4 inch seam, then you want to do a 1/4 inch seam, an 1/8 of an inch seam first, and then an 1/8 of an inch. If you're doing a 1/2 inch seam, your first seam is going to be 3/8, and then you'll do an 1/8. So you're taking all your seam allowance except 1/8. If you're doing a 5/8, then you do a 1/2 first and then an 1/8. I hope that kind of makes sense. So I've drawn it off here, so it's a little, I really want you to see what is going to happen. So that's why I'm drawing it off. On the right side of the fabric, which that's the side I'm going to sew on first, I'm going to sew, I've traced a 3/8 inch line because I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. On the wrong side, which is the second place that I'm going to sew, I drew the 1/2 inch line. So that's where my final seam needs to be because my pattern is saying that it's in 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay? So I put wrong sides together first, and then I'm going to do a lightning stitch down the inside of that line. So you're actually doing it between the two lines that you drew because your other line is, see, on the other side. So you want to be very close to this line, but on the inside of the line. Just do a little lightning stitch. It's a little teeny tiny zigzag. Then you're going to trim off your fabric right up to that zigzag. And what's nice about this is because you have such a tiny amount of fabric inside that seam allowance, this really hangs on to the fabric so that it doesn't just ravel out. And then you'll open it up and you'll see that you have your 1/8 inch line, because that's going to be your second seam allowance. Okay, so I have pressed it. We've already trimmed this one, and I'm going to press it again so you can see I've found this new spray. It's called Easy Press, and it actually comes in a spray bottle, a mister bottle, a small one, and you get a refill. You can buy big refills for it. And I found this when I was doing a quilt not too long ago, and what it does is it helps you press things so that they're nice and flat. And I mean, they just get as flat as can be. It's not starch. Okay, now I'll put that up there. And you can see how nice and, I mean, that's just as flat as can be. And you want to make sure that you don't have any pleat right here in that seam, because your next step is to press that so that your seam is right on the top edge, and then you'll sew right on your second line that you drew. Now see, that's your 1/2 inch line. Okay, so it'll look like this, and look how tiny that seam allowance is. It's so small and pretty. Here's a piece done with Swiss Batiste, and that's what we usually use on our Swiss Batiste, is a French seam. But really what I wanted you to be aware of is how to judge where your seam allowance is so that you have the right seam allowance for the right garment so that it fits in the end. I thank you so much. Please subscribe. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Thank you.